Next department report, I'll ask Captain Reed Bear of the Hickory Police Department to come to the podium. As you all know, for about the last 3 months, Captain Bear and Ms. Dula and Mr. Crone have worked with the Rental Property Task Force, which you all appointed in September. And the results of that work will be presented to you this evening. Captain Bear.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council, Mr. Barry, and Mr. Crone. I'm going to talk briefly about the Rental Property Task Force, which was formed in September and has met through September, November, and December. And I'm here to report the objectives, the topics that were discussed, and the final recommendation. Excuse me. I'm going to start with the objectives of the Rental Property Task Force, which were to recommend approaches to City Council, which were to assist rental property owners owning and knowing and responding to illegal and nuisance behaviors being perpetrated by tenants. To recommend approaches to assist neighbors of rental property in reporting problems and understanding the city and rental property owners' response to these concerns. Recommendations should be as simple and straightforward as possible and take into consideration the impact on city staff and property owners and the rights of citizens who rent property. These objectives are to be completed within 90 days and will be assisted by city staff in the analysis of crime and nuisance data. So these are the objectives that the task force was presented with and went by. Some of the primary topics of discussion during our meetings, where myself, Ms. Dula, and Mr. Crone assisted task force members with questions and presentation of that, were city codes and general statutes currently utilized by the City of Hickory when dealing with property issues, community concerns with regard to problem properties in their neighborhoods, city codes and programs adopted by other cities and legal issues surrounding them, landlord rights and ability of cities to regulate landlord-tenant relationships, and police call statistics and police code enforcement statistics. The police and code enforcement statistics were presented by myself. Mr. Crone and Ms. Dula answered questions surrounding legal issues surrounding the landlord-tenant relationship and the rights of both. The final recommendations are as follows. The first recommendation that the task force would like to recommend is the City of Hickory should offer educational opportunities for landlords to learn about city codes and general statutes surrounding property in the City of Hickory. They feel that this would best be accomplished through a workshop seminar environment and should be offered on a regular basis and advertised through the media. One of the things that was evident in the beginning of our meetings was that even the task force members themselves did not know the general statutes and city codes, all of them that surround property, whether it be nuisance property or whether it be North Carolina general statute. Another recommendation is currently no changes to the city ordinance are recommended at this time, pending an evaluation and the effectiveness of the chronic violator nuisance ordinance provisions. As you remember, in the fall, or excuse me, the summer, the chronic violator provisions were passed by City Council. As of January 1, 2011, we will have our first idea of how that is going to affect the calls for service and the impact on the community with regard to repeat calls for service for nuisance properties in the City of Hickory. The task force recommended that they reconvene in 6 months to a year to evaluate if this ordinance change has had any impact on the quality of rental property and the workload of the Hickory Police Department Code Enforcement Unit. Another recommendation that staff would like to make is that this be a presentation to City Council. This being the results of the chronic violator impact on calls for service, communities, and the community meetings with regard to what's going on. Opposed to reconvening the task force, perhaps invite the task force to this presentation so that everyone can come together to see how this change is affecting the city and these calls for service. And as a reminder, the chronic violator has been defined by our code, which will again, January 1, we will have the first calendar year under our belts. And the chronic violator will be a person who owns property whereupon in the previous calendar year, the city has given notice of violation at least 3 times under any of the provisions of our public nuisance ordinance, which is chapter 20 of our city code. The final recommendation, which is more of a statement that the task force would like to make, is the task force supports the addition of any resources to the Hickory Police Code Enforcement Unit if the police department feels that this is necessary. The task force want to be clear that they were not recommending an additional staff person, that they would support it if the police department had the data and we felt that this was necessary. And those are the final recommendations of the rental property task force. We have any questions?
I have one question as far as the chronic violator. There is no grace.
No, ma'am.
No grace.
No, ma'am. There's no grace.
So after a certain day, the lien will be filed with the property. The code enforcement unit would have the case once someone is a chronic violator, and would, after notification, after the paperwork was said and done, that would be sent to the legal department. And as far as the lien, I'd have to refer to Ms. Dool as to how the timeline, if you will. So council and the task force would be apprised of, say, in a year's time or 6 months' time, liens that have been put on property.
Actually, what we had contemplated was simply giving you all a report of how is it working. How many properties have we had that have fallen into the category? Actually, it's not property. I mean, owners that we had that have been designated as chronic violators. What's the status of their reconciling the situation, etc. We did not contemplate on a case-by-case basis bringing those to City Council.
I'd like to actually see numbers on that.
We certainly, in the weekly mailing, can include in there a simple synopsis of any that fall into that category.
To keep us kind of abreast of where it is, and that is something to take care of your property, do things you don't have to be afraid of the code enforcement. If you've got a problem, then y'all do business.
I'd like to make a couple comments. First of all, I think that we're on the right track with the task force and what's going on in the recommendations being made. I think that, of course, Captain Bear has done an outstanding job in heading up this task force. I'd like to thank the members that served on the task force. All I know that Don's here tonight, Don Moore, and I'm not sure if anybody else is here or not in the staff. But what I'd like to do is make a motion that we approve these recommendations with 2 changes. And my recommendation would be that in number 2, it is outlined here, that they reconvene in 6 months instead of 6 months to a year. And in number 3, I would like to include as part of that motion that I think that there's enough evidence here to support the fact that they need additional personnel immediately, and I'd like to change that number 3 to say that to add at least 1 additional code enforcement officer immediately.
Just for clarification on that motion, so you are in your motion. You want the task force to be reconvened in 6 months?
Well, maybe not dismissing Donald, but they can stay as a task force, but in 6 months, I guess come back and give us an update. I don't recommend that we disband the task force.
So that's kind of one issue, because you all gave the task force 90 days, which is now up.
Yes.
And Captain Bear presented kind of staff recommendations not to get back into, extending the time of that task force, but simply say, okay, the task force did their work, they're done. We'll report back to City Council in that 6 to 12 month free time. So just for point of clarification, so that we understand that.
Well, if I read number 2 here, it says that the task force should reconvene in 6 months. My recommendation, it says 6 months per year, so take out 2 a year, and just leave it at 6 months.
And then from the standpoint of staffing, Attorney Cronin and I just conferred for a moment. That would actually take a mid-year budget amendment that we would have to bring to City Council because currently, additional staffing is not in the budget which you all approved that went into effect July 1st. So just that would take your action to appropriate those funds before we could advertise and hire additional staff.
We had a hiring freeze too.
We do have a hiring freeze in place. That's correct. And Chief Atkins and I have not actually discussed, how the police department feels about their staffing and where it is and the caseload, et cetera. So that just takes some work on our end.
It seems to me, and I will say this, that this particular unit has shown tremendous capability, and it seems to me that they help not just in the police department, but it helps across the board, all of the departments within the city. And I've heard nothing but praise from our citizens and everyone that has been affected by this unit. And the only negative that I've ever